Of all the members of the Quad and the BRICS groupings, India alone faces a direct military threat from China. Lofty discussions about global peace and institutional reform cannot serve as a substitute for safeguarding territorial integrity and the security of our own population. India cannot afford to allow high-minded rhetoric to provide cover for an unfriendly neighbour to alter facts on the ground across the border. We must therefore pursue a careful balance. India must engage economically with China where necessary, while simultaneously strengthening military deterrence to prevent irresponsible adventures. The pursuit of peace does not negate the need for preparedness. On the contrary, credible deterrence can be an essential condition for preventing conflict. The historical record of attempts to impose peace through force offers little reassurance. The stability of that period masked deeper structural changes that have now shaped our uncertain present. Peace is, yes, universally desired, but it's rarely unconditional. Every nation proclaims its commitment to peace, yet few are willing to pursue it at the cost of power, pride, or perceived security. Peace is framed as acceptable only when national interests remain untouched. The moment peace requires compromise, whether over territory, status, or historical narrative, it becomes politically inconvenient. The international system itself, as we've heard already this evening, compounds this difficulty. It is built around sovereign nation-states, each accountable first of all to itself. Competition is not an aberration, but a structural feature of the system. Even institutions created to preserve peace reflect power inequalities among states that ensure outcomes are often shaped more by strength than by fairness. When rules are applied unevenly, trust erodes and the promise of peace weakens. Yet perhaps the most profound obstacle lies in the paradox of power itself. Those entrusted with maintaining global order often possess the greatest capacity to disrupt it. The institutions established after the Second World War were noble in conception, but unequal in design. They reflected the hierarchies of power prevailing of the time of their creation. They reflected the geopolitical realities of 1945. Authority was concentrated in the hands of a few, while responsibility was shared by many. And as Vijay Nambiar told us, all great powers are afflicted by exceptionalism, double standards, and hubris. This imbalance has consequences. When powerful states act as both guardians and exceptions to the rules, the legitimacy of the system suffers. Peace becomes something to be managed rather than shared, imposed rather than negotiated. Order is confused with justice, and stability with fairness. But as Anil Suklal reminded us, no peace can be possible without justice. Yet an unequal peace is rarely just. Weaker states in such a world are asked to trust a system that does not always protect them, while stronger states are tempted to act unilaterally when the rules no longer suit them. And we've seen this so many times in this century. Libya, Syria, Gaza, Ukraine, Venezuela for that matter, and perhaps Iran tomorrow, who knows. The fact is, when that happens, nations fall back on the oldest instrument of international relations, which is force. And as Vijay Nambiar again pointed out, liberal internationalism is in retreat. The great powers have all shed their sense of moral responsibility. So after 80 years of its existence, the UN stands at a crossroads. The bipolar order of 1945 gave way to American unipolarity, which has now yielded to a fragmented multipolar landscape, and, as Professor Suklal said, perhaps reassertions of unilateralism in this fragmented landscape. New powers have emerged, old alliances are frayed, transnational challenges increasingly defy traditional diplomacy, as Shyam Saran reminded us. The institutions of liberal internationalism are completely under strain, quoting Vijay Nambiar, not only from authoritarian regimes, but also from within the democracies that designed and were meant to uphold the international system. The UN's foundational principles of sovereign equality, peaceful dispute resolution, and collective security are arguably more vital than ever. Yet they're also more contested. The Security Council remains frozen in the power dynamics of 1945. Calls for reform have grown louder, particularly from countries like India, Brazil, and South Africa, all represented on this podium, and also Germany and Japan. I would argue that India's case is compelling as the world's most populous nation, the largest democracy, a major contributor, the largest contributor to UN peacekeeping, and a rising economic power. India could arguably say its conduct reflects the spirit of the UN Charter, and that its exclusion from permanent membership of the Security Council remains a glaring anomaly. But some would also say that seeking permanent membership in a dysfunctional institution whose own permanence might be questionable is itself somewhat problematic. Now, despite its shortcomings, nonetheless, I would say the UN still continues to play a vital role. Its humanitarian agencies deliver life-saving aid. Its peacekeepers provide stability in fragile regions. Its convening power creates space for dialogue on world-relevant issues, even when agreement seems distant. Its declarations and resolutions have shaped global norms on human rights, gender equality, and sustainable development. If the UN is constrained, it is constrained by its members. When powerful states flout international law or misuse veto power, the organization is weakened. When funding is politicized or withheld, its capacity to act is diminished. The UN is not an abstraction. It is a mirror of the world, reflecting its inequalities, divisions, and aspirations. When the US withdraws, as it did last week, from 66 UN agencies and bodies, the organization is not imperiled, but it is undermined. And yet, as Professor Sukla asked, is there an alternative? What is the alternative? This question reminded me of a famous story that used to be told 60 years ago when these same sorts of attacks were made on the UN system by the then Soviet ambassador to the UN, Yakov Malik, who said, you know, when I hear this question, I'm reminded of the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, he said. Because Adam finds one day that Eve has become a bit indifferent to him. So Adam says to Eve, Eve, is there someone else? Now you think about that for a minute. If you're asking about the UN and the whole world is becoming indifferent to it, is there anyone else? Is there anything else? It's the only UN we've got to make the best of it. So for all these obstacles, peace remains not merely desirable, but necessary. The choice before humanity is not simply between war and peace, but between cooperation and collective ruin. Yet these abstractions acquire sharper meaning when viewed through India's own strategic realities. Of all the members of the Quad and the BRICS groupings, India alone faces a direct military threat from China. Lofty discussions about global peace and institutional reform cannot serve as a substitute for safeguarding territorial integrity and the security of our own population. India cannot afford to allow high-minded rhetoric to provide cover for an unfriendly neighbor to alter facts on the ground across the border. We must therefore pursue a careful balance. India must engage economically with China where necessary, while simultaneously strengthening military deterrence to prevent irresponsible adventures. The pursuit of peace does not negate the need for preparedness. On the contrary, credible deterrence can be an essential condition for preventing conflict. The historical record of attempts to impose peace through force offers little reassurance. The chaos that followed the American victory, the military victory in Iraq in 2003, stands as a stark reminder of the limits of coercion.